Mr. President, ministers, I'm honored to join this regional meeting of the Arctic Circle to give an update on the Arctic Circle Task Force on Shipping and Ports. Let me make sure I can move this forward. The Shipping and Ports Task Force is a unique project in the Arctic Circle, which was established to promote investment towards safe, secure, and reliable Arctic shipping. And our manner of working reflects the Arctic Circle as an open NGO. If you've been to the large meetings held in Iceland, many different groups convene to work on issues, and this reflects the Arctic Circle as an open, non-governmental organization convening like-minded people in a democratic manner. We announced the Shipping and Ports Task Force at regional meetings in Anchorage, in Singapore, the meeting in Iceland last October, and we've had many different people from Arctic Council member nations, observer nations, expressed interest in being part of the task force from government, the academic level, and the corporate level. And we've had discussions with those who are preparing for the Finnish chairmanship of the Arctic Council. We believe the timing of our work leading up to some culmination reports late this year is right for the Finnish chairmanship. And we also have a very interesting situation in the Arctic today with regard to shipping. You heard very important announcements yesterday, especially the very important announcement about the partnership between Eimskip and Royal Arctic Line. Just earlier this spring, you heard an announcement by China about a national Arctic policy to take much greater advantage of Arctic shipping. You heard from Korea Maritime Institute yesterday about work that Korea Maritime Institute has done, and I happened to be in Korea at the time of President Grimson's visit with the President of Korea, and President Park has been outspoken in her interest from Asian capitals on the value of Arctic shipping. And Mr. President, I thought the communique at the end of your meeting there was very important. You've seen an announcement at the Arctic Circle last fall of Japan's new Arctic policy. You heard from Minister Tan yesterday from Singapore about how the importance of shipping to Singapore's economy and the interest of Singapore in watching and helping to guide the growth of Arctic shipping. The United States just released a major report on infrastructure needs in the Arctic and placed at the top of that list, coming out of the Department of Transportation, the development of ports and refuge and infrastructure for shipping. That includes Port Clarence, a project which you've heard about in other Arctic Circle issues. And even in the last year, the Russian government announced that it had hired a set of consultants to take the Northern Sea Route administration and see what they could do to play a larger role in the global shipping market. And I think we're all interested to see that report come along. And finally, you have some new major drivers in Arctic shipping coming along, especially the construction going on right now of new ice-breaking LNG tankers to bring gas from the Yamal region through the Bering Strait into Asian markets, as well as a number of others looking at liquefied natural gas sources on the North American coast that might well go to Asian markets. And so I would say that while the numbers are down, the activity on Arctic shipping continues to grow. And this chart that was initially part of some of the discussions that we had in the Arctic Marine Shipping Assessment, whether it's the Northeast Passage, the yellow line, the Northwest Passage, the green line, or the increasing capability with icebreaker support to use the transpolar routes, it is something that's very appropriate for us to be working on. Just to go back on a little bit of history, in 2009, 8 Arctic nations set a safety agenda for Arctic shipping. I was then chairman of the U.S. Arctic Research Commission, and we paid for this report, which was written by 8 nations, co-chaired by 3. And the safety agenda that was established in 2009, we have seen lots of activity to move forward on that safety agenda. Before the 2009, of course, there was the Article 234, Law of the Sea, which took special knowledge of the fact that in ice-covered waters, measures are needed for protecting the environment with the growth of shipping, with a unique provision in international law that said that coastal states can require itinerant vessels going by to be part of a pollution prevention regime. You've seen Russian, Canadian, U.S. legislation, the national parties, the policies that I mentioned. We had the Arctic Marine Shipping Assessment. We had the 2 binding agreements, the Arctic Council Search and Rescue Agreement, which was signed here in this city in 2011. I was here with the foreign ministers when they did that, and the Arctic Council Oil Spill Agreement in 2013. We now have the IMO Polar Code becoming effective, and quite a bit of additional work by PAIM and our Coast Guards in the North cooperating on a much stronger level than they have in the past. We recently had a forum in Washington at the Wilson Center on implementation of the Polar Code, and I will say that for many of the concerns that people had about safety in the Arctic, implementation of this law is very important for equipment, design and construction, operations and manning, and we should congratulate ourselves that the result of meetings like this on a non-governmental sector, the result of the governmental meetings, the result of the hard work that has brought us to a much stronger level of safety on Arctic shipping than we had when the initial report came out in 2009. So now let me get back to the task force for a second. The Shipping and Ports Task Force was established with 3 goals. One was to establish a League of Arctic Ports, to try to have Arctic ports across the world, and these are either ports that may be in the mind of promoters to actually happen, such as Port Clarence in Alaska or Finnafjord in Iceland, or existing ports which have the possibility to expand. The idea of having the Arctic ports work together was one concept. A second was to determine options for an Arctic seaway regime. There is a Northern Sea Route administration, but it doesn't seem to be catching hold in the marketplace, and so one of the questions is how might we have international cooperation on an Arctic seaway? And then third, we said we wanted to support Arctic infrastructure investment in general, and you heard a very good panel on that from the financiers yesterday. On the first goal, establishing a League of Arctic Ports, the idea would be to bring ports serving the Arctic as well as ports in the Arctic to the table. The goal is to advocate for necessary infrastructure and customers to help convince the global shipping community that there is the capability for reliable service. Paul Foos, who is formerly the mayor of Unalaska Dutch Harbor, probably Alaska's gateway port to the Arctic Ocean, a former Commissioner of Commerce, will lead that effort. And we've decided through the task force to try to do a pre-meeting of the Arctic Circle meeting coming up in October, where port individuals would be invited to come the day before the Arctic Circle meeting begins in Iceland and result with a declaration of a League of Arctic Ports and move on from that. There has been a draft set of bylaws and guides that will go out to task force members and go out to port officials very soon. And the idea here is to have an organization that will advocate for safe, secure, reliable Arctic shipping. On the second goal of establishing a seaway, I think we've got a little bit more work to do, and I say this as president of an investment bank and private equity fund. This is really one of the most difficult business plans I've ever had a chance to work on. But I will say that the idea of an Arctic seaway regime is related to other initiatives that governments and private industry have taken together in the past, and I'm going to talk a little bit about COMSAT and the St. Lawrence. We have a couple of tough questions, some of which were referred to by Dr. Bergman's talk yesterday. Tough questions on icebreaker configuration and a business model. I like to think of the Arctic Ocean as a deep, dark woods. And if you want to get across the deep, dark woods without being caught by the wicked witch, is it better to have a convoy of ships going across with several icebreakers taking you across on a schedule? Or is it better to have a set of lamp posts, maybe pickets, 5 or 6 icebreakers there to do a zone-by-zone effort? Either way, icebreakers cost money. You can get a medium-class icebreaker in this world from Finnish sources, from American sources, from Russian sources, from Asian sources for $30 to $40 million a year. $30 to $40 million a year times 6 icebreakers is $250 million a year. If the savings from our Arctic crossing is such that you could charge a couple of $100,000 for a crossing, you would only need a couple of hundred crossings in order to pay for the icebreaker escort system that would provide the safety and the security and the reliability. And most of the rulemaking that's happened in the past has basically said, let's build the ship capacity through the Polar Code, let's have the search and rescue capacity, but no one has said, okay, what can we do cooperatively to put up a shingle to say we're going to have icebreaker service to get you through the deep, dark woods? And that's the question. One of the questions is, once you figure out from ice conditions and availability of icebreakers what kind of configuration you need and what the business model is the legal standing issue. Because frankly, this is an open ocean to any comer from around the world. While Russia insists that they have the legal capacity, and I believe under Article 234 they do have the legal capacity to charge a tariff to use those waters, and Canada likewise, the United States and other nations have said, no, this is an open ocean, open to innocent passage. So we've also had discussions with the insurance community. And some members of the insurance community have said, if we see such a regime, a seaway regime, get into place, then we will tell people that insurance costs are much less if you use this regime. So these are some of the kinds of options that you'll see in the option papers for the workshop, for the task force. We're planning a workshop in Washington, D.C. prior to the Arctic Circle. Alice Rogoff and I have been working to enlist the Wilson Center in that regard. And we hope to have a further workshop in this with the Arctic Circle regional meeting in Quebec. I think that's a very appropriate place to do this because Quebec is where the St. Lawrence Seaway comes in. And this whole effort is being co-chaired by former Alaska Senate President and former Bush administration cabinet member Drew Pierce, who's very active in Arctic affairs, and I'm thankful that she's taken this on. Let me go to 2 analogues very quickly as I move to conclude the talk about how the planet has come together before when something brand new has happened to make something happen. In 1962, the United States Congress passed a Communications Act which said create a company called COMSAT. Have that company go out to the ministries of Post and Telecom around the world and let's see if we can float an issue on Wall Street and raise enough money to put up enough satellites that we would have satellite-based telecommunication for data, for television, for voice around the world. Within 10 years, only with that mandate from Congress, we got to a system of satellites which was launched. By 1972, it was a successful reality, and 49 countries joined to have phone service work, and that was because of new technology. Where we are today is we have a new ocean. We have a newly accessible ocean. And so we are working with some legislators, some parliamentarians in several different countries where we floated the concept of a COMSAT-type piece of legislation, which says let's start a service that would have the icebreakers available and see if ultimately this can be a public-private partnership. But I use the ComSat example as one notion. Another is the St. Lawrence Seaway, and let me just say about this seaway. The St. Lawrence River, as you know, comes in the Gulf of St. Lawrence in Quebec, goes into the Great Lakes, and is used by international traffic constantly. A ship going from the Gulf of St. Lawrence to, say, Duluth in Lake Superior would cross the U.S.-Canada border 23 different times. But the two nations have gotten together and have said, we will offer a consistent service together to have safe, secure, reliable shipping. And likewise, as part of the inspiration for the League of Arctic Ports, you have all of these ports where you have these red dots. They may compete with each other to put goods on or off the water, but they cooperate with each other in promoting the seaway. And so that concept of the seaway is a model. We drafted parallel legislation, though you could do it also by international agreement. It has a revenue and a regulatory model to support the work that it needs. It has support from insurers and salvors. And as you apply this model to the Arctic, we have to respect legal differences in water status. And again, I refer to UNCLOS Article 234 as one method to get us around that. The last goal of the task force is to support Arctic infrastructure investment. And frankly, we've done less of our own original work there, except that we included this because the idea of financing mechanisms we thought was important to achieve the other two goals. We heard yesterday a very good panel on finance. We heard the concept of trigger investments in the north. We heard the need for scale where multiple players, in the case of Arctic shipping, the cost is in low single-digit billions. And you couldn't turn a mile of dirt in Panama for what it would cost to get the icebreakers in place to offer reliable Arctic service. We heard that reliability promotes investability, and so the task force really wants to support the process that Scott Minard laid out yesterday and that we've been working on together at the World Economic Forum. The Arctic is an emerging market. GDP in the Arctic has grown consistently at a much higher rate than the GDPs of most industrialized nations around the world. And it's likely that we're going to see a GDP in the Arctic of over $500 billion by 2030 by some estimates that we made at PT Capital. We believe this growth is going to happen because of resources, associated development, sea routes and trade, and technology advances. The Arctic has potential to do more. Right now, we help feed the world, we fuel the world, we provision the world, we protect the world, we help connect the world, and I'd say that the growth of tourism is evidence we help inspire the world. But other Arctic links are on the way, and I just leave this to say that while we talk about sea routes, it's very important to consider what we're doing on sea routes in the context of what we heard yesterday on air routes. What we are hearing about the extension of airports, especially here in Greenland. There's new technology been announced, and one Arctic player that's bought a series of airships under construction. There are some major rail extensions underway, new fiber optic lines across the Arctic on the drawing board, some going into construction this summer. Iridium will be launching 70 new satellites this year that will increase the telecom communications capability in the Arctic. We're hearing interest of transshipment ports, ports of refuge, large projects on HVDC power, and of course pipelines, LNG and FLNG. My point is this, is that the concept of biting the bullet and coming together to say what kind of regime can we establish in the Arctic to have safe, secure, and reliable shipping, the timing is very ripe. And in the context of the other kinds of major links happening here, these are the trigger investments that will bring sustainable economic growth to this part of the world. So I conclude really with this progress report with a continued invitation. If you are interested in being part of this, we will be sending out a series of papers for comment. We will be inviting you to the League of Ports meeting before the Arctic Circle meeting in Iceland, as well as the workshops. And frankly, I can tell you that we cannot do this alone. It's been a shoestring effort, but one where we've attracted the interest of parliamentarians and governments across the world, and I'm very excited to be able to give you this report today and would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.